it's not a question of whether they had a veto-proof majority or not. There was going to be more than a handful of Republicans who were going to defy Trump. And the thing about a bully is, once people start to defy you the first time, they might defy you the second time, the third time, the fourth time, because your game has been exposed, and he just doesn't want to risk that right now.
Professor Scott Lucas from the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Very good afternoon, Maddie.
You and I spoke last week, but there is so much that has happened in the last few days when it comes to this Epstein drama for Donald Trump, and we have to keep going. We have to follow it along because our audience obviously love to hear about what you have to say and your analysis of it all. So I want to start off with, of course, the big story being Donald Trump surprised everyone by releasing a statement where he backed House members voting for the DOJ to release these Epstein files. He said it's time to move on. He said House Republicans should vote to release the Epstein files because we have nothing to hide and it's time to move on from this Democrat hoax perpetuated by radical left lunatics in order to deflect from the great success of the Republican Party. So last week, Scott, late last week, we saw Thomas Massie say that he was predicting a snowball amount of Republicans set to come forward and vote in the final hour of releasing these Epstein files. That will take place tomorrow. But do you believe that this is the reason as to why Donald Trump has made this backflip?
Yes. There you go. Podcast done. Right? Geez, this is the easiest question that you're going to give me all day, Maddie. Look, the White House, had this big lobbying effort last week that we mentioned, where they pulled in the 4 Republicans who were going to join the Democrats in this discharge petition, which would demand the vote. And we talked about how, the best known of those 4 is Marjorie Taylor Greene. But in fact, they lobbied the 2 other women, Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace. And neither Mace nor Boebert would back down, even though they are diehard Trumpists. And at that point, what happened here is that a lot of Republicans who might have wanted the files released, they didn't want to be the 218th signature on that petition. They didn't want to be the tipping point signature. And of course, that was the Democratic representative, Adelita Grijalva, who was finally sworn in by, Mike Johnson, the House Speaker. Once that happens, these Republicans can come and vote for this motion on Tuesday, and they don't have to be the decisive member that Trump takes aim at. And Massie raised the stakes. So Thomas Massie said not only did he want to get a majority for the release of files, he wanted to get a 2/3 majority. That was his target. Now, 2/3 majority is significant because it's veto proof. Even if Trump wanted to block this, the House could override it. Now, it doesn't mean that, in fact, if there had been a 2/3 majority in the House, that was it, because the Senate still has to vote as well. But it would have been a huge symbolic defeat for Trump on Tuesday if he's still against the release of the files and you get all these Republicans that are joining the Democrats. So what does he do? He tries to change the narrative here, which is, no, I'm the one for transparency here. And he's going to supplement that by saying it's all the Democrats. It's all the Democrats who are in the files anyway. And we know it's absolutely bogus, because if you honestly believe that, Donald, you would have released the files back in February when Pam Bondi said, we're reviewing them. They're on my desk. And so it's Trump trying to go back on the offense rather than being on the defense. How effective that's going to be the next question we need to pick up on as this moves forward to the vote.
Scott, you mentioned this veto-proof amount of Republicans. And so late last week, we only had 4 Republicans out of these 218 that were voting in favor tomorrow on Tuesday of releasing these, of voting in favor of the discharge petition. So in order to get 2/3 majority of both the House, they would need around 290 votes in the House, and then they would need 67 votes in the Senate. So, do you think that Thomas Massie will get this amount of votes? He said he's got close to 100 Republicans now, which is obviously a stark contrast to the 4 that he had, last Thursday. So do you think we'll get there?
Coincidentally, or far from coincidentally, and I think I mentioned this last week, David Schuster, one of the top journalists in Washington, has been saying for a couple of weeks that there were 100 Republicans that were ready to vote for this. Now, that may be because Thomas Massie told David Schuster that. We don't know that for sure. But yeah, that number of 100 was floating around. And quite clearly, if you get 100 Republicans joining the 214 Democrats, they are now well above that 290, which is the 2/3 mark that Massie's getting. So I think equally significant was that there were some senior Republicans in the Senate who were beginning to move their position. They had said that the release of the files wasn't necessary, and now they were starting to say, we'll have to look at this, we'll have to consider this. I think John Cronin was one of them, who's one of the top Republican senators. So Trump was facing losing face in the Senate as well. I think it's not a question of whether they had a veto-proof majority or not. There was going to be more than a handful of Republicans who were going to defy Trump. And the thing about a bully is, once people start to defy you the first time, they might defy you the second time, the third time, the fourth time, because your game has been exposed, and he just doesn't want to risk that right now.
So Thomas Massie was asked about this reversal from Donald Trump. He said that this might be a big smokescreen, these investigations, to open a bunch of them as a last-ditch effort to prevent the release of the Epstein files. So this, coupled with a tweet that went quite viral from Don Winslow, he basically numbered the situation. He said, number one, Trump was told that he was going to lose the House vote. Number two, Trump comes out and says Republicans should all vote yes after a full year of trying to block everything. Number three, but he set a new investigation at the Justice Department. Number four, Justice Department comes out and says we can't release due to a new investigation. Number five, Trump says, well, it's not my fault. I told them to vote yes. Number six, note, Trump never told the Justice Department to release everything without any further delays and stop phony investigation into his political enemies. So is this a very calculated move, Scott, from Donald Trump to do this reversal? There's more in this.
You can't rule it out, because technically you're right. If Pam Bondi, Trump's political sidekick and the attorney general, if she says, well, we've got a live investigation which is going on with possible prosecutions and Trump has asked her to prosecute Bill Clinton. He's asked her to prosecute the former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. And Reid Hoffman, the LinkedIn co-founder and a prominent donor to the Democrats. So if Bondi says, well, we're investigating these three people, so we need to keep the files and see if they're named in them, so this is an active investigation. Yeah, that's plausible. But the thing is, you've just outlined how people know that might be the next move, which means that if Trump does this, people are going to say, oh, you're just stalling again. You're just delaying. So I would think it would be an extremely risky move for Trump to do this. It would, because even his supporters, this is the key, even his supporters are onto him over this one. They're not buying all the, sorry, I need to make sure I don't use an expletive here. They're not buying all the rubbish. They're not buying all the diversions. They're saying we want to see the files. And I don't think they'll buy that diversion either.
But Scott, a lot of, including Thomas Massie, a lot of Republicans, and including Marjorie Taylor Greene, have come out saying, look, I don't even think that Donald Trump has done anything wrong. I'm not saying that these files would indicate that he's doing anything wrong personally, that his past would bring up something incriminatory. All I'm saying is what their argument is, that they believe he is protecting rich, powerful men who broke the law.
And that is a very powerful argument and a very important argument. I know we're focused on Trump, but the fact here is that we now are in 2025 and beyond Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm trying to think of any other person who has been accountable.
No.
On the American side. You could say on the British side that there have been people who've been accountable in a political sense. Andrew, formerly known as Prince, and Peter Mandelson, the former UK ambassador of the US. But in the US, nobody else has taken even, at least publicly, a reputational hit. Now, some men have taken hits amongst the elites who know that they are there, but they haven't been outed publicly. So I think that's a pretty powerful argument. I don't agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on about 99% of what she says. In fact, I think she's a conspiracy theorist. But, even a blind squirrel can find an acorn once in a while. And there is a legitimate issue here, which is young girls were trafficked, young girls were abused, young girls were raped, and who were the people who did this. But I will get back to Trump for just a minute. The issue with Trump is not that Trump is complicit in Epstein's pedophilia, and there's no evidence that says that he's complicit. The issue with Trump here is that Trump was closer to Epstein than he has let on, and that he might have known of the pedophilia. And why do I say that? If we go to the most recent emails, Epstein's email, unless he's lying, when he writes Ghislaine Maxwell, places Trump in his apartment. Other emails place Trump in his house. When he's in his apartment, Trump is alongside at least one victim of Jeffrey Epstein, whether or not he knew she was a victim, Virginia Jeffrey. At that point, you have to say, how much did Donald Trump know about what Jeffrey Epstein is getting up to? And let me illustrate that, Maddie, if I can. And I know we got to watch the time here, but I want to tell you a really quick story that is actually pretty significant here on multiple levels. A side story on this is that another person who is named in the emails is Donald Trump's longtime chief strategist, Steve Bannon, the very hard right figure. Now, Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein were close. They were close in 2018. There's a series of emails. And a reminder, this is almost a decade after Epstein's first conviction in Florida. And Epstein and Bannon are exchanging basically emails about political tactics, about media tactics. The reason why I tell you the story, to take it back to Trump, is, and I'm not sure the media picked up on this yet, Bannon thanks Epstein for the help he is giving him. And Epstein responds, yeah, no problem. Massages not included. Now, that word massages, I don't think it takes much of a leap here to realize what that refers to. And he's telling that to Steve Bannon. Now, if Jeffrey Epstein is also talking about massages to Donald Trump, even if Trump is not, in fact, actually, I take this back. There's another email in that dump where Jeffrey Epstein says that Trump was involved with the girls who were there, but he never got a massage, right? Now, if he ever talked to Trump and said, oh, massages, etc., then as far as I'm concerned, jig's up. Trump knew about what was happening. If that is ever established, then he's culpable. He's culpable legally, but he's also going to be culpable politically.
Scott, I want to get into a few of these emails that you and I spoke about last week and the ones that have kind of just dropped in the last few days or so. But before we get into the specifics, I do want to ask you, because of course we saw Adelita Grijalva finally be sworn in late last week by Mike Johnson after waiting, 50 or so days. The effort that the Republican Party really went to delay this, many critics believe, many, even including Republicans, believe the reason was to delay this vote that will happen tomorrow. So just let me get your yes or no answer. Do you feel like Donald Trump has been backed into a corner here?
Yes. And again, another relatively easy question is that having spent now, if you take this back to February, when they said that they would review the files at least, and we're up to November, 9 months later, Trump and his, I don't call them lackeys, that would be impolite. Trump and his officials have stonewalled all the way to get to this. And Trump was stonewalling until last weekend. Let's put this in perspective. When he launched a vicious campaign against Marjorie Taylor Greene, calling her Traitor Greene, because she was one of the 4 people that signed the discharge motion to bring this to the floor. And even as Donald Trump said last night that he would support the release of the files, he launched another attack, vicious attack, verbal attack, on written attack, I should say, on Marjorie Taylor Greene. So he is still assailing those who wanted to bring this to the floor of the House. So, let's be very clear here. Trump would not have done this if he thought he could prevail without a vote. He is simply he may be trying to buy a little bit of time here because it'll have to go to the Senate. There'll be all kinds of procedural maneuvers in the Senate. And I would not rule out that he may flip again when it comes time to sign the bill. He may say, look, I'm not going to sign it because of X, Y, and Z. But at this point, he does not have a good option. The only thing that saves him right now is if he can hoodwink the media. if he can hoodwink the media to believe that he genuinely is supporting the release of these files for some type of transparency, if they buy into that false narrative, then he may get away with it. But I just don't think, even as much as the mainstream media have been hoodwinked in the past by him, I don't think they get led that way this time.
Let's get into the emails. Scott, you were on the show last week when these 3 emails dropped by Democrats on the House Oversight Committee. So just for our audience to understand kind of the timeline of events, the first 3 emails, one was from 2011, Epstein to Maxwell claiming that Donald Trump spent hours at his house with a victim, which was later reportedly to be Virginia Giuffre. In 2015, the second email, 2015, Epstein and Michael Wolff, the journalist / author, discuss what debt and political currency they can get out of Donald Trump in his election campaign period. The third is in 2019 when Epstein tells Michael Wolff that Trump knew about the girls and asked Ghislaine to stop. So then comes the 20,000 extra documents that drop by the House Oversight Committee, and journalists and, any political pundits, I guess, spend the next few days kind of sifting through and seeing where Donald Trump is named. So that's kind of why it felt to, the average Joe that this was being drip fed. But really, there was so many documents to go through. I went through a lot of them and I was trying to find some of the best things. So here are the takeaways just for the audience. Epstein hated Trump, labeled him evil, dangerous, the worst person he'd ever met. In other messages, he described Trump as a maniac showing signs of dementia. Epstein claimed once to a journalist that he had photos of Trump posing with girls in bikinis. In another, he asked a reporter, he goes, asked my houseman about Donald almost walking through the door, leaving his nose print on the glass as young women were swimming in the pool. And he was focused on walking through the door. In a 2018 email, Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, writes to Jeffrey, ask him if Putin has the photos of Trump blowing Bubba. We're not quite sure what that means. It was later debunked because people thought that may have been Bill Clinton. And then Epstein writes to the Council of Europe in 2018, suggesting that he can offer insight on Trump that could be passed to Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, before Trump and Putin were set to meet in 2018. So there was so much more in that. But Scott, just for analysis for this, period of time, these 20,000 emails, when you look at them and they're being sorted out by journalists, what do you feel has been the most damaging to Donald Trump? Or does it really look as if Epstein was actually almost trying to frame him?
The most damaging remains the initial 3 emails that came out that you've summarized, especially the 2 emails. We talked about this last week, but to reiterate, the 2011 email is significant because it puts Trump in Epstein's apartment and it puts him there alongside a victim. Right now, maybe Trump was completely unaware of why that girl is there in Jeffrey Epstein's apartment, or he may try to claim that later on. Right? Or it may be that at that time, that victim was above the age of consent by that time, that she becomes, as it were, a young woman rather than a girl. We can talk in more detail about that as we get more information, but it puts Trump in the apartment and which means he lied. He lied about his proximity to Epstein. 2015, the damage between the exchange between Wolff and Epstein, and it's not a very pleasant exchange, because these 2 guys are talking about getting, let's use the right word for it, leverage. I don't want to use the word blackmail because that has criminal overtones. So leverage against Donald Trump. And specifically, remember what they said is they are looking for a question of Trump. What do you know about Epstein? What's your connection with Epstein? And they're saying that if Trump denies having been in Epstein's plane and in Epstein's residences, they can use that against Trump. They can use that either to damage Trump by making it public, or they can go to Trump and say, you don't really want to make this public. What are you going to do in return for us? The 2019 exchange is, again, still ambiguous because Trump knew about the girls, which is the line there. That, could refer to the fact that, Trump's line that he knew about doesn't mean that Trump knew that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were poaching girls from Mar-a-Lago for their nefarious activities. Trump knew why these girls were being taken away, or was it that Trump simply knew they were being poached but didn't know why they were being poached? That's why he can skate away on that one. In terms of the emails beyond that, they just add other layers to that. And you've quoted a couple of them, which is, the fact here is that Epstein does say that Trump was in closer proximity to him without implicating Trump in terms of activities involving the girls. And I do want to highlight, because it's important to be precise here, there is a difference here in the way that I think you and I are using the terms girls and young women, and that is the age of consent. We know that Donald Trump, look, it's public record, has an affinity for young women who are still above the age of consent. We know that. It's a huge difference if in those Epstein emails he's referring to young women using that definition as opposed to girls. Because the way that Trump skates away from this is, oh yeah, I like, and Trump says he likes young women. In fact, he bragged to Trump about Epstein about liking young women, but it's just on that other side of the age of consent. But I think the other thing that's on top of this in terms of the emails is how much Jeffrey Epstein hated Trump, despised Trump. Now, did he despise Trump because he had sussed Trump out? That Trump, as Epstein put it, did not have a decent cell in his body? Or did he hate Trump because he felt betrayed by Trump, or both? The issue here is that I think Epstein's hatred of Donald Trump doesn't do real damage to Trump, because being hated by a pedophile is not something that is necessarily a black mark on your record. It is going to come back to the substantial revelations that are there. And that, let me bring that all the way back around to the top where we are. We may get more emails that come out that add to the story, but the significance here is that the case files, which is what we're talking about what the Trump administration has refused to release, that are related to the trials of Jeffrey Epstein, especially the 2019 trial. These are the Justice Department detailed investigation files. They are going to have levels of information beyond what is there in emails. They're going to have witness testimonies. They're going to have other observations from people who were close to these affairs. They're going to have other depositions from people that may be able to add information. That is why Trump has held out for so long, whether it's to protect others or protect himself. Because the thing is, he won't know, and this is something we forget, he won't know whether it's on this, in those 100,000 pages. He won't know how much he might be exposed by this. So he's had to play it all along until now. Don't let him out. Don't let him out. But now, as you put it earlier, he's cornered.
I mean, this is the point, just to wrap this up, Scott, this is the point that Thomas Massie makes. He says, I don't know if Trump's in these files. I don't know who's in this. But what he's saying is that having spent all this time with the lawyers of Jeffrey Epstein victims, he can now name, allegedly, because he hasn't seen the files, he hasn't seen the proof, but he can go off what the lawyers are saying. He said, I've named 20 people, not publicly, but he's saying, I know the names of politicians, billionaires, movie producers who are allegedly implicated in this and have not been investigated. So that's his point. He said, why are we not jumping to investigate people who are allegedly involved in pedophilia and sex trafficking? And the way we do that is exactly why you say, looking at these Epstein files, these witness testimonies, all the evidence that no one else has seen. So we've got to wrap it up there. So Professor Scott Lucas, thank you for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you so much, Maddie.